Her true story. From New Jersey, my daughter screamed, "You ruined my life." So I left, and left her the credit card debt too. She tore up my photos. I froze her accounts. "You ruined my wedding. You ruined everything. You ruined my life. Shut up and get out of my wedding right now." They say weddings are supposed to be the happiest day of a woman's life. That day, my daughter's face was radiant, yes, but not because of joy. It was rage. I remember the exact sound. Not her voice, not the slap. It was the crash. The crystal vase toppling over, shattering into a million sharp shards against the polished floor of the ballroom. That sound. That was the sound of something breaking inside me. It happened so fast, but also, somehow, in slow motion. My hand had trembled a little as I reached to straighten the floral arrangement on the display table near the altar. It was a silly instinct. I always liked things to be symmetrical. But my arthritis, as usual, betrayed me. My fingers gave out. The vase wobbled, tipped, fell. Gasps echoed through the hall. Heads turned. Then Melissa, my only daughter, standing at the altar in her $10,000 gown, clutching a bouquet of white roses, snapped around like a whip. Her face twisted into something I didn't recognize. "You ruined my wedding. You ruined everything." Her heels clicked like gunshots on marble as she stormed toward me. I opened my mouth to apologize, to explain, but before a word left my lips, I felt the first slap. Sharp, quick. Her palm met my cheek with the fury of 20 years of resentment I never even knew she carried. And then the second came. Harder. My body jolted. I lost balance. My knees buckled. My hand hit the floor first, then my knee. A hot sting shot up my leg. My carefully pinned hair spilled loose, curls falling into my eyes. I heard someone scream, not in fear, but in embarrassment, in scandal. The music had stopped. No one moved to help me, except Emily, my late sister's daughter. She rushed to my side, knees down on the floor, her soft voice whispering, "Aunt Linda, are you okay? Here, let me help you." I remember the coldness of the floor, the dull throb in my shoulder, and the thick silence that followed. All those guests, family, friends, strangers in tailored suits and dresses, just watched. Melissa had already turned her back to me, walking away like I was a stain on her wedding day. I was the mother of the bride, and I had just been slapped to the ground by the bride herself. Emily helped me up, wiping a spot of blood from my knee with a napkin she found on a table. My cheeks burned, not from the hit, but from the humiliation. The betrayal. I looked around and saw eyes pretending not to stare, lips whispering behind champagne glasses. My gaze found my daughter again. Melissa stood near the altar, flanked by her new in-laws. Her new mother-in-law placed a hand on her back, like a shield. Melissa didn't look at me once. I steadied myself, fixed my hair with shaking fingers, and gathered my small clutch from the floor. My body ached, but my heart had gone numb. I think I'll go now," I whispered to Emily. She clutched my hand tightly. "Let me take you, please." I shook my head. "No, I'll call a cab." I walked past rows of stunned faces, past the string quartet who had no idea whether to start playing again, past the wedding planner holding a clipboard, eyes wide with discomfort. I walked out of that ballroom like a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. No one stopped me. No one called my name, not even my daughter. Outside, the cold hit me like a slap of its own. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the sun set behind the marble columns of the reception hall. Then I reached for my phone. My fingers still trembled. My cab arrived 10 minutes later. The driver looked surprised to see a woman in a formal purple gown, hair askew, with blood trickling down her knee. "Miss, are you okay?" I smiled faintly. "Just drive, please." The ride home was quiet. I looked out the window, watching the city blur past. I thought about all the things I had done for Melissa, all the nights I stayed up while she had the flu as a child, all the piano recitals I attended with roses, all the times I said yes when she asked for just a little help with rent, tuition, car payments, clothes, groceries. And most recently, 6 months ago, I had cashed out a portion of my retirement savings to cover the down payment on the house she and her fiancé desperately wanted but couldn't afford. I did it because I loved her, because I believed I would always be her mother and she would always be my daughter. Tonight, she showed me just how wrong I had been. My phone buzzed once in my purse. A notification. A wedding photo already posted online. Melissa smiling with her new husband, surrounded by her bridesmaids. I wasn't in the photo. Of course I wasn't. By the time I got home to the small guest room she had given me in the basement of their house, I felt the first tear fall. Just one. Then another. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in my lap, staring at nothing. On the floor beside the dresser was a small cardboard box. In it, tucked beneath a folded blanket, was the album I had made her when she graduated college. Photos from her childhood, birthday parties, her first tooth, her high school prom, her father before he passed. I had carried that album across 2 moves. I had wrapped it myself in bubble wrap. Tonight I picked it up and held it close. And I realized something. That vase wasn't the only thing that shattered today. My illusion of love, the one that told me that if I just kept giving, kept being quiet, kept being good, I'd always be valued. That illusion broke too. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a mother. I felt like a mistake, but deep inside me, something else stirred. It was not anger. It was not revenge. It was clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is louder than pain. Tomorrow, I would clean my wounds. And then I would begin again. But not the way Melissa expected. Not the way anyone expected. They thought I was a harmless woman with a kind heart and a quiet tongue. They were right. Until now, I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed, fully dressed, shoes still on, the pain in my knees throbbing with every small movement. But the pain in my body was nothing compared to the hollow that had opened up inside my chest. When the sun crept in through the narrow basement window, I got up. I did not brush my hair. I did not put on fresh clothes. I walked up the creaky stairs with the quiet steps of someone returning to a house where they were no longer welcome. Melissa was already awake. She was in the living room, standing in front of the fireplace. Her veil was still on the armrest, tossed carelessly. The wedding dress had been replaced by a white bathrobe, but the fury in her eyes was untouched by sleep. She was holding something in her hands, thick pages. I recognized the cover immediately. It was the photo album, the one I had made by hand, the one I had given her when she turned 25, the one with the linen cover and gold script that read, "Our family, our forever." "Where were you?" she asked coldly. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could answer, she tore the first page straight down the center. "You embarrass me in front of everyone," she hissed. I blinked. "Melissa, you've always ruined everything," she said, louder now. "You never made anything easier for me." Another page ripped. The photo of her as a baby in her father's arms. Torn. "Melissa, please stop," I said, my voice trembling. "I mean it," she spat. "You're not even family anymore." The next page. My wedding photo. Me in my mother's lace dress, holding roses, beaming beside her father. Torn in half. I couldn't move. My hands froze at my sides. My legs felt like stone. I just stood there, watching as my child, the same little girl who used to cry when I left for work, who used to draw hearts around our stick figure doodles, tore through our memories like trash. "You never did anything for me," she screamed. She flung the album into the kitchen trash can. Pages fluttered like wounded birds. Then she picked up the lid and slammed it down. "Do you hear me, Mother?" she said. "I don't owe you anything." And then she walked out. The silence afterward was louder than the yelling. I stood there for a long time, not knowing what to do with my hands or with the pounding in my heart. Then slowly, very slowly, I walked over to the trash can. I lifted the lid. There they were, torn pieces, ripped faces, bent edges, lifetimes reduced to scraps. I reached in with shaking hands and pulled them out, one by one, each photo cut deeper than the last. A birthday cake with 5 candles, Melissa's gap-toothed grin. The vacation to the Smoky Mountains, her arms wrapped around my neck as we laughed in the cold. The hospital photo, me holding her newborn form, sweat still on my brow, love burning in my eyes, gone. All of it. I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the photos, my knees sore against the tiles. My fingers tried to piece some of them back together, aligning edges, pressing tape from the junk drawer onto corners that no longer fit. But the tape didn't heal anything. It just reminded me that even love has limits when it is not returned. At some point, Emily called. I didn't answer. I could not speak. I couldn't even cry. I just sat there in silence, holding pieces of my life in my hands, trying to find sense in the senseless. She had said I was not family anymore, and for a moment I almost believed her. Because how could anyone do this to their own mother? How could someone destroy the very proof of their own existence, memories that someone else had protected for decades? The tears came slowly, then all at once. Hot, aching sobs that rattled out of me like an exorcism. But I did not scream. I did not curse her name. I just wept, for the girl I had raised, and for the woman she had become. Later that day, she went out with her new husband. Not a word was exchanged, not a glance in my direction. I heard the door slam, and then nothing. Just the ticking of the wall clock, the sound of my breath, the ripping sound still playing over and over in my mind. I cleaned the floor. I folded the torn photos and placed them in a Ziploc bag. I hid it beneath my pillow that night. I do not know why. Maybe to remind myself that it all had been real once, that love, even when forgotten, had once lived here. That night, I stared at the ceiling, one thought looping in my mind. If I meant nothing to her, maybe it was time I stopped acting like I owed her everything. The pain had carved something open inside me, and something else had quietly stepped in to take its place. Resolve. After Harold died, the house felt too big, too quiet, too much like a museum for a life that had moved on without me. I sold it 3 months after the funeral. No one pressured me to. It was my choice, or so I told myself. The truth was, I was tired of cooking for one, of sitting in the same recliner, staring at the same framed photo of our honeymoon in Cape Cod. I needed something else. Or maybe I just needed someone. Melissa had called me the week before I signed the paperwork. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "we're falling behind on the mortgage again. If we miss another payment, we might lose the house." I didn't even ask her how far behind they were. I didn't ask what they'd been doing with their money. I just asked for the amount. She hesitated, then told me, and I said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." That's how I ended up, draining half of my savings from the retirement account Harold and I had built over 40 years. The funds were meant for medical emergencies, for late-leave comforts, for me. Instead, I paid 6 months' worth of mortgage up front, directly to the bank, so Melissa and her husband could have peace of mind and not lose their roof. I did not tell them the exact amount. I did not even let them see the receipt. I didn't want praise. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted her to feel safe, wanted her to feel loved. I believed, naively, that doing something selfless would bring us closer. It did not. At first, things seemed fine. I moved out of the nursing home and into the small guest room in their house. The walls were lavender, and Melissa had even laid out a welcome basket. Lotions, some herbal teas, a new pair of slippers. She hugged me when I arrived, kissed my cheek. For a few weeks, we had late-night talks. She showed me fabric samples for her wedding. I told her she looked just like her grandmother in that ivory dress. We laughed. It felt, briefly, like I had a home again. But something shifted. The closer we got to the wedding date, the more distant Melissa became. At first it was in the small ways. She would forget to tell me when her schedule changed. She would come home, toss her bag on the floor, and walk right past me without a greeting. Then it turned into muttered comments under her breath when I left a dish in the sink. Or when I asked if she wanted help with the seating chart and she rolled her eyes and said, "You wouldn't understand." One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone, saying, "I swear, sometimes it's like having a toddler in the house again. She just needs things." She was talking about me. I said nothing. I made myself smaller. I cooked dinner and stayed out of sight. I cleaned up after their dog, even when it wasn't mine to clean. I folded their laundry while watching old black and white movies on mute. I did all this because I believed what I had told myself in the nursing home. Mothers endure. That's what we do, even when our hearts break, even when we are forgotten, even when love turns into a ledger of perceived inconveniences. The day before the wedding, I offered to go pick up the flower arrangements. She said no. I asked if she wanted me to steam her veil. She didn't answer. So I sat in my room and quietly packed away the lace handkerchief I had saved for her, the one my mother gave me on my wedding day. I had embroidered Melissa's initials into one corner. I folded it and placed it at the back of my drawer. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in sorrow. A sorrow so deep, it made my bones ache. A sorrow so quiet, it could sit beside you at the dinner table and you'd never even know it was there. I kept thinking of the check I had signed. of the 6 months of mortgage payments I had made, without a thank you, without even a passing acknowledgement, and I realized something that felt like betrayal. Kindness, when unspoken and assumed, can turn into something invisible, and invisible things are easy to ignore. I wanted to scream, "I helped save your house," but instead, I wiped the counter. I wanted to say, "I gave you everything I had," but instead, I nodded when she said the potatoes were too salty. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, asking Harold if I had failed somehow, if loving her too much had turned into something she resented, if making life too easy had made her think I had no life of my own. By the time her wedding day came, I was already a ghost in that house. But ghosts don't bleed, and I did, on that ballroom floor, in front of everyone. The morning after the wedding, I awoke in the motel Emily had helped me find. The floral comforter smelled like bleach and the walls were thin, but it was quiet. No one rolled their eyes at me. No one shouted. I sat at the small desk and poured myself a cup of stale coffee from the lobby pot. Then I opened my worn planner and looked at the name I had written down months ago. Cameron Blake, estate and financial attorney. Cameron had handled Harold's will after his passing. He was kind, discreet, and never spoke to me like I was too old to understand my own business. I called his office. His receptionist said, "Of course, Mrs. Patterson, he's available this afternoon." By 2 o'clock, I was seated across from him in a leather chair that swallowed my frame. Cameron looked over his glasses, took my hand gently, and said, "You don't have to explain everything right away. Just tell me what you need." I took a deep breath. "I want to know every account that still has my name on it, every credit line, every joint asset. I want to know if Melissa has access to anything of mine." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't pry. "Let's take a look." What he uncovered, I hadn't even remembered. Apparently, 5 years earlier, Melissa had convinced me to co-sign a credit card when she was struggling to build her credit. I had been skeptical, but she promised she'd be responsible. I agreed only on the condition that she'd use it for emergencies. What I didn't know was that I was still the primary holder, and she had been using a supplementary card under my name for years. The statement printed out with a rustling hiss. $2,400 at a bridal boutique in Manhattan, $900 at a spa in Montclair, $6,800 at a wedding venue deposit, airfare, designer shoes, rental cars, cocktail bars, month after month, all charged under a name she clearly forgot wasn't hers. Balance due, $51,327.92. I sat very still. I didn't cry. I didn't ask how she could do this. I already knew the answer. She did it because I let her. Because every time she took, I told myself that giving was my job. Because I thought that enabling was love. I looked at Cameron and asked, "Can we freeze it?" He nodded slowly. "We can freeze the credit line, cancel the supplementary card, and put a full fraud alert on the file, given she was using it without your knowledge of the extent." I smiled, the first real smile in days. "Then let's do it. Let her plan her own next shopping trip." He clicked a few things on his computer and began preparing the freeze request. As I signed my name at the bottom of the form, something inside me shifted. Not just relief, but reclamation. For the first time, in a long time, I was taking my name back. "She'll find out eventually," Cameron said gently. "She might not take it well. I hope she doesn't," I replied, calm and unwavering. "Maybe then she'll finally feel something that isn't entitlement." He leaned back. "Would you like to make any changes to your estate plan while we're here?" "Soon," I said, one step at a time. On my way out, I passed a flower shop. I stood in front of the window for a long time, staring at a vase that looked almost identical to the one I had broken at the wedding. This one was deep blue, smooth around the edges, placed next to a note that read, "Fragile, handle with care." I thought about buying it, about putting it on my future kitchen table, wherever that might be, but I didn't. Instead, I walked away with a thought I had never let myself believe before. If she saw me as disposable, then she never deserved the part of me I gave. It was barely a week after I signed the papers with Cameron when my phone rang. Let it go to voicemail, then another. This time, Melissa's name flashed on the screen. Melissa, in all caps, just like the way she used to text me demands. I stared at it for a moment, then let it ring. 30 minutes later, it rang again. I picked up. "What did you do?" Her voice was shrill, panicked. I could hear the clatter of heels, the echo of an empty room, like she was pacing. Why are my cards not working? I just got a notification that the entire account is frozen. What the hell is going on? I said nothing at first, just listened. I went to the bank, she went on, breathing heavy, and they said, I'm responsible for $51,000. They said the credit line is no longer valid and I can't access anything. What did you do? I waited for the silence. It came, short and sharp. Then I said, You told me I ruined your life. What? She snapped. Go let the bank fix it, I finished quietly. You can't just do this, she screamed. You can't just disappear and pull the plug on everything. I have bills, I have payments, I have a wedding loan still active. I heard her breath stutter, like she had just realized the whole financial web she'd spun was coming undone. The girl who once wore matching silk pajamas and boasted about living like a queen was now at the mercy of interest rates and payment deadlines. You had no right, she hissed. No right to freeze it. That was our agreement. There was no agreement, I interrupted. My voice was calm, even. There were only withdrawals, and I finally stopped authorizing them. You're my mother, and you're the one who said I was no longer family. Dead silence. I pictured her standing at the counter of that cold, sterile bank, makeup smudged, confusion turning to rage, the financial floor cracking beneath her expensive heels. For once, I didn't feel guilt. I felt gravity. She had floated through life on invisible support, convinced she was walking on clouds. It was time she realized that cloud was me. You used my name, I said. You used my credit, you used my money, you used my memories and burned them in the trash. Now it's your turn to use something else, your own 2 feet. I ended the call. There were no follow-ups that day, but the next morning I got a voicemail. Her voice was small, not angry, just frightened. Mom, I didn't know it was like that. I didn't know how much I owed. They said I need to pay within 30 days or they'll take legal action. Can you just talk to me, please? I listened. I let the voicemail finish. Then I deleted it. Sometimes love is a warm blanket, a home-cooked meal, a quiet understanding. And sometimes it is a locked door. For 30 years I had been a revolving door for her moods, her tantrums, her shopping sprees, and her silences. I let her walk in and out as she pleased, thinking that motherhood meant never setting boundaries. But I was done being the doormat at the wedding she never thanked me for. She had slapped me in front of 200 people and said I ruined her life. Let the bank teach her what real ruin feels like. I moved into Emily's apartment in Queens just before the first frost of October. The leaves on the trees were the color of copper pennies, and the windows steamed from the kettle she always seemed to have boiling. It smelled like cinnamon and dried lavender, and something else I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Emily had insisted. After everything that happened, she drove herself all the way down from New York to get me. Not a word of pity, not a trace of judgment. Just, Aunt Linda, you should never live in a house where you feel like an inconvenience. Her building was small but filled with light. Her neighbors knew her name. At night, I could hear the sound of jazz coming from the apartment upstairs. Somehow, even the city's noise felt comforting. She cleared out the spare room for me, painted it in soft blues, hung a little sign over the bed that read, You belong. I cried when I saw it, not because it was fancy, but because no one had made me feel like I belonged. In a very long time. Emily worked long shifts at the hospital, but she always came home smiling, always asked how my day was. We had a little ritual, tea at 8 p.m. no matter what. She'd sit cross-legged on the couch in her scrubs, and I'd wrap my shawl around my shoulders and pour for both of us. That first week, I was quiet, still stiff from everything that happened, still hearing Melissa's words in my head over and over again like the crack of that broken vase. But Emily, she made room for my silence. She let me be quiet without making me feel invisible. One evening, while we were having tea, she asked softly, What was your favorite memory of being young? I blinked. No one had asked me about me in years, not about my aches or errands or bills, but about who I used to be. I told her about a boy named Michael who used to pass me notes during algebra, about the time I skipped school and danced barefoot in the rain, about the turquoise dress I saved for 6 months to buy and only wore once, to a roller rink on my birthday. She laughed, wide-eyed. Damn, Aunt Linda, you were wild. And just like that, I laughed too. really laughed. My whole chest shook. I had to put my teacup down because I was afraid I'd drop it. Emily laughed with me, until we were both in tears. That was the moment it happened. The thawing. It was not dramatic, not cinematic, just tea and laughter and two women, one who'd lived too long in the shadows and one who kept the light on. Later that week, Emily helped me start a little herb garden on the fire escape. I planted basil, rosemary, and a stubborn lavender that refused to sprout. She teased me that I talked to the pots more than to her. I began knitting again, reading. I found myself waking up before the alarm, excited to stretch dough or brew coffee, just because it felt like living again. I wasn't in a mansion. I wasn't needed for mortgage payments or babysitting or emergency loans. I wasn't a placeholder or a prop in someone else's perfect life. I was Linda, and that was enough. The call came late on a Thursday night. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter after baking Emily's favorite lemon bars, when the phone rang. The name flashing on the screen stopped me cold. Melissa. I hadn't heard her voice in weeks. Not since the bank notices had started piling up at her door. Not since the credit card companies had begun circling like hawks. I hesitated, just for a second, then answered. "Mom?" Her voice was cracked, hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. "Mom, I don't know what to do. They're saying I owe over $50,000. They froze everything. I can't even buy groceries. I didn't know the debt was in your name. You never told me." I stood still, my fingers curled around the edge of the counter. I could almost see her on the other end, mascara smudged, pacing the kitchen floor of a house I had helped pay for. "I need your help," she continued. "Please, just call the bank and explain. Just remove your name like before. You always fix things. Please, Mom. Please." There was a pause. "You're my mother. You have to help me." I leaned back against the kitchen wall, closed my eyes, and exhaled. "No, Melissa," I said softly. "I do not." She went quiet. Then a whimper, followed by rage. "What do you mean, no? You're just going to leave me in this mess? You can't do that. I'm your daughter." I felt a strange stillness inside me. Not anger, not revenge, just calm. "I taught you love, Melissa," I said gently. "I gave you everything I could. But now," I opened the drawer and pulled out the last letter from the bank, with her name printed next to mine. "Now, I'll let the bank teach you consequence." She started sobbing, loud, wet, desperate sobs that once would have broken me, but not anymore. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't mean what I said at the wedding. I was stressed, I was scared. You always know how to handle things. Please, Mom. Please forgive me." I closed my eyes again, let the silence settle between us like dust. "I do forgive you," I said, "but forgiveness doesn't mean I have to fix what you broke." More crying. A whispered, "Please." "I hope one day," I added quietly, "you look back and understand that this wasn't punishment. It was the only way I could teach you to stand on your own. Goodbye, Melissa." And I hung up. My hand didn't shake. My voice hadn't risen. There was no bitterness in my chest, just clarity. I set the phone down and turned back to my lemon bars. The scent of citrus still lingered in the air. Emily was due home any minute. She'd walk in, tired from her shift, ask me how my day was, and listen when I answered. She wouldn't yell. She wouldn't ask for money. She wouldn't tear up my photos. She'd just sit across from me, sip her tea, and talk to me like I mattered. For the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't someone's emergency fund, someone's scapegoat, or someone's silent support beam. I was just a woman who had finally drawn the line between love and being used, and I wasn't crossing it again. I never thought I would stand at a podium again. Not at this age, not with these knees, but there I was, one Friday afternoon in the basement of the Ridgewood Public Library, surrounded by folding chairs and the hum of a too-old air conditioner. The room was filled mostly with women. Many wore cardigans even in the spring warmth, their hands folded on their laps or wrapped around paper cups of weak coffee. Some sat next to daughters, most did not. The sign behind me read, "Elder Voices, Real Stories of Resilience." I adjusted the microphone. My voice came out softer than I expected, but clear. "My name is Linda," I began, "and I used to believe that being a mother meant..." A hush fell. They leaned in, not with pity, but with recognition. I told them everything. How I had left the assisted living home to help my daughter. How I paid 6 months of her mortgage from my own savings. how I lived in her house, cooked her meals, folded her laundry, and how on the most expensive day of her life, dressed in white lace and diamonds, she slapped me to the ground and told me I ruined everything. I watched as women dabbed at their eyes with tissues. One woman let her coffee go cold in her lap. Another reached for the hand of the lady beside her. I told them about the torn photographs, about standing in the driveway, watching my own wedding picture drift in the wind like trash, about the silence that followed me around that house, the way I learned to walk quieter, ask for less, make myself smaller. Then I told them about the accounts, the debt, the law firm, and the moment I said enough, I did not say it with rage, I did not say it with revenge. I said it with a quiet that echoed more loudly than any scream I could have mustered. I froze her credit cards, I said simply. I stopped shielding her from herself, and I left. There was a beat of silence. Then, as if on cue, someone in the back whispered, "Good." A few women clapped, quietly at first. Then others joined. Some nodded, some smiled through tears. No one asked me to apologize. One woman in a lavender blouse raised her hand. "How did you know it was time to leave?" I looked at her. Her eyes were full of something I knew too well. Guilt, the kind women carry like a second spine. "I did not know," I said honestly. "I just knew I couldn't keep staying." There were no follow-up questions, no lectures, just a silence full of understanding. I ended with one final sentence. It was not rehearsed, it just came. "Forgiveness is optional," I said, my voice steady. "Dignity is not." They wrote it down. Every word. I saw it scribbled into notebooks, tapped into phones, whispered to one another as they left. Some of them came up to me afterward, clutching my hands like lifelines. One woman hugged me tightly and said, "You gave me the courage to finally move out of my son's basement." Another whispered, "I thought it was just me." It was never just us. That was the lie. I walked out of the library into the late afternoon sun, and there they were. Emily, waiting by the fountain with her daughter Ava, my great-niece, but the closest thing I had now to a grandchild. Ava ran to me, squealing, arms flung wide. I scooped her up and kissed the top of her curly head. Emily raised her phone. "Smile, Aunt Linda," she said. And I did. Not the polite smile, not the brave smile I used to wear like armor. This one came from somewhere deeper, somewhere I had thought long buried beneath guilt and silence and broken glass. We stood together, 3 generations, the library behind us and the whole rest of the evening ahead. As the camera clicked, I thought about the photos that had been torn apart, burned, erased, and I thought, they burned my photos, but they never burned my worth. I am not a bank account. I am not a burden. I am not a ghost in someone else's house. I am Linda, and I am finally home. She was slapped in public, humiliated at her own daughter's wedding. Her photos were torn, her worth denied, and her silence mistaken for weakness. But Linda didn't scream. She didn't beg. She chose dignity. And in the end, when her daughter cried for help, Linda gave her the only answer left. "I taught you love. Now I'll let the bank teach you consequence." This is not just a story about money or even betrayal. It's about every woman who gave too much. Every mother who stayed quiet. Every grandmother who was told she no longer mattered. They burned her memories, but they couldn't burn her value, because self-worth is not written in thank you notes or family titles. It's written in how you rise when the world says sit down. Linda's story, like so many others we share on this channel, is a reminder that forgiveness is a choice. But dignity? Dignity is a right. At Grandma True Stories, we believe that silence should not be the end of anyone's story. Not after everything they've survived. Not after everything they've given. If this story moved you, if you saw your own mother, your grandmother, or even yourself in Linda's voice, then don't let her story disappear into the algorithm. Click subscribe, hit the bell, share this with someone who needs to remember. They still matter. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We give the mic back to the people who were told to stay quiet. And we say, loud and clear, revenge has no expiration date, neither does your worth. This is Grandma True Stories, where the forgotten finally speak.